The sun was dipping low over the rolling hills of Oak Valley, casting long shadows across the golden pasture that I called home. My boots crunched against the gravel driveway as I pulled my old Ford pickup to a stop, the familiar hum of the engine fading into the quiet evening. I'd just gotten back from town, where I delivered a load of hay bales to a local feed store. The day had been long but satisfying, the kind of day where you feel the ache in your muscles and know you've earned it. My ranch, Second Sunrise, was my sanctuary, a place I'd poured every ounce of my soul into for the past 5 years. But as I stepped out of the truck, something felt wrong. The air was too still, the usual chorus of clucking chickens and nickering horses oddly muted. Then I saw it, and my heart stopped cold. A line of temporary fencing, cheap orange plastic netting, stretched across the front of my property like a scar. It wasn't just a fence, it was a declaration of war. Bold red and white signs were staked every few feet, their words screaming at me, "Property under HOA management. Trespassers will be fined." I stood there, frozen, my breath catching in my throat. My mouth went dry, and my hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles ached. This was my land, my ranch. I'd bought it outright, free and clear, with every penny of my life savings and a small inheritance from my uncle. I'd signed the deed, shaken hands with the county clerk, and spent years turning this place into something real, something mine. And now, some faceless organization was claiming it like I was nothing more than a squatter. I blinked hard, half expecting the signs to disappear, like this was some kind of heat-induced hallucination. But they didn't. They stood there, mocking me, their plastic sheen glinting in the fading sunlight. My pulse hammered in my ears, a dull roar that drowned out everything else. Behind me, my dog Max, a loyal mutt who'd been with me since I moved here, let out a low growl, his ears pinned back. Even he could sense the violation. The horses in the paddock were stomping nervously, their hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. The chickens, usually a noisy bunch, had gone silent, huddled together in their coop like they knew something was coming. I took a step forward, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and that's when I saw them. 3 figures in bright neon vests, standing near the entrance to my barn like they owned the place. They were HOA officers, I could tell by the way they carried themselves, all puffed up authority and zero respect. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair and sunglasses he clearly didn't need in the dim light, broke away from the group and strode toward me. He held a clipboard in one hand, gripping it like it was a badge of honor, a weapon to wield against me. His walk was deliberate, each step calculated to make me feel small. I squared my shoulders, forcing myself to stand taller, but inside, I was reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not to me. You're no longer permitted to operate on this land unless you agree to the HOA rental terms, he said, his voice calm and smooth, like he was reading me the weather forecast. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat was tight, the words stuck somewhere between shock and rage. What? I finally barked, my voice louder than I'd intended, echoing across the quiet ranch. This is my ranch. I bought this land 5 years ago. You can't just show up and claim it. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a slow, smug grin that made my stomach churn. It was the kind of smile you see on someone who knows they've got the upper hand, someone who enjoys watching you squirm. Actually, sir, he said, drawing out the word sir like it was a jab, according to the updated HOA bylaws and our recent land use annexation, we've officially absorbed your property into HOA territory. You can contest it, of course, but until then, rent is $8,400 a month. Due immediately. I blinked, my mind struggling to process the absurdity of it. $8,400 a month. To live on my own land. Land I'd paid for, worked on, bled for. Land where I'd built a life, a purpose, a future. My vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from pure, unfiltered anger. I couldn't speak. It was like my brain was stuck, replaying his words over and over, trying to find some shred of logic in them. There was none. This was madness. This was theft. Behind me, Max growled again, his hackles raised. The horses were getting louder now, their nervous pacing turning into full-on agitation. I could hear the creak of the paddock fence as one of them leaned against it, desperate for reassurance. Even the land itself seemed to be protesting, the wind picking up and rustling the trees with a restless energy. But the man in front of me didn't care. He just stood there, clipboard in hand, waiting for me to crumble. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, though every nerve in my body was screaming to do the opposite. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Call whoever you want. You're trespassing on private property." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached up and slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes that studied me like I was an insect under a microscope. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his overpriced cologne. "Not anymore," he said, his voice low and deliberate, each word dripping with menace. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear but from the sheer audacity of it. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a calculated move, a power grab by people who thought they could roll over me because I was just one man, just a rancher with no fancy lawyers or deep pockets. They were wrong. Before I could say anything else, one of the other officers, a shorter guy with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, stepped forward. He was holding something bright orange in his hands, a parking boot, the kind you see clamped onto cars in city lots. My stomach dropped as he knelt down and slapped it onto the front tire of my tractor, the metal clanging against the rubber with a finality that made my blood boil. That tractor was my lifeline, the workhorse of this ranch. I used it to plow fields, haul feed, clear brush. And now it was immobilized, chained like some criminal's getaway car. I was done being calm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, taking a step toward the guy with the boot. He didn't even look at me, just kept tightening the clamp, his movements mechanical and detached. The tall man with the clipboard raised a hand, as if to calm me, but it only made me angrier. "This is standard procedure," he said, his tone infuriatingly patronizing. "Uncooperative property holders are subject to equipment restrictions until compliance is verified. You'll get it back once you sign the rental agreement." "Sign the rental agreement?" I repeated, my voice rising to a near yell. "You're out of your damn mind if you think I'm signing anything. This is my land. My home. You don't get to waltz in here and start making demands." He sighed, like I was a child throwing a tantrum, and jotted something down on his clipboard. "I understand this is upsetting, Mr. Miller," he said, somehow knowing my name, which sent another jolt of unease through me. "But the annexation is legal, and the terms are non-negotiable. You can either cooperate, or we'll be forced to escalate." "Escalate?" I spat, my hands shaking now. "You're the ones escalating. You're the ones trespassing. You're the ones putting boots on my equipment, and trying to charge me rent for my own damn property." He didn't respond, just gave me that same smug smile and turned to walk back toward the barn. The other two officers followed, their neon vests glowing like warning signs in the twilight. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching them move with the confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. How could this happen? How could a group of bureaucrats in vests and clipboards just show up and claim my land? I'd heard stories about HOAs, about their petty rules and overreach in suburban neighborhoods, but this was something else entirely. This was a land grab, pure and simple. I reached into my pocket for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed the sheriff's office. I'd known Sheriff Dalton for years. He bought tomatoes from me every summer, always with a grin and a story about his wife's cooking. If anyone could help, it was him. But as the phone rang, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The tall man was back, standing by the barn, talking into a walkie-talkie. His words were too quiet to make out, but the tone was unmistakable, clipped, authoritative, like he was giving orders. The other 2 officers were marking something on the ground near the barn, staking out lines with spray paint. They were planning something big. The sheriff's office picked up, and I didn't waste time. "This is Luke Miller out at Second Sunrise Ranch," I said, my voice tight. "I've got HOA people on my property, claiming they own it. They're putting up fences, locking my equipment, and telling me I have to pay rent to stay here. I need someone out here now." The dispatcher, a woman named Carol who I'd met at a county fair once, sounded confused but concerned. "HOA? On your ranch? That doesn't sound right, Luke. I'll get a deputy out there as soon as I can, but we're tied up with the festival downtown. Might be a couple hours. Try to stay calm, okay? Don't do anything rash." "Calm," I said, my voice cracking. "They're taking my land, Carol. They're acting like I don't exist." "I hear you," she said, her tone softening. "We'll get someone there. Just hang tight." I hung up, my hands still trembling. Hang tight. Easy for her to say. She wasn't standing in her own driveway, watching strangers carve up her life like it was a piece of meat. I turned back toward the barn, where the officers were still milling around, their voices carrying faintly on the breeze. Max was at my side now, his growling louder, more insistent. I put a hand on his head, trying to steady both of us. "Easy, boy," I whispered, though I didn't feel steady at all. The tall man noticed me watching and started walking back over, his clipboard still in hand. I braced myself, ready for another round of his smug nonsense, but this time he didn't speak right away. He just stopped a few feet away, looked me up and down, and shook his head, like I was some kind of disappointment. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said finally. "Sign the agreement, pay the rent, and you can keep working your little farm. Fight us and you'll lose everything." "Little farm," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This isn't some hobby, you son of a bitch. This is my life. My home. My animals, my crops, my future. You don't get to call it little and act like it's yours to take." He raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "It's not personal, Mr. Miller. It's progress. Clearwater Estates is expanding, and your property is in the way. You can either get on board or get left behind. Progress," I said, stepping closer, close enough that he had to tilt his head to meet my eyes. "You call this progress? Stealing a man's land? Putting boots on his tractor? Scaring his animals? You're not building progress. You're building a lie." For the first time, his smile faltered, just for a split second, but it was enough to tell me I'd hit a nerve. He recovered quickly, though, tucking his clipboard under his arm. "You've got until tomorrow to decide," he said. "After that, we start enforcement proceedings. Fines, liens, eviction if necessary. I'd think about what's best for you and your animals." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my chest heaving, my mind a whirlwind of rage and disbelief. Enforcement proceedings. Eviction. The words echoed in my head, each one a fresh wound. I looked around at my ranch, the barn I'd rebuilt with my own hands, the paddock where my horses grazed, the garden where I grew vegetables for the local market. This was my place, my purpose. I'd named it Second Sunrise because it was my second chance, a new beginning after years of scraping by. And now these people, these vultures in neon vests, were trying to rip it away. I walked over to the tractor, staring at the orange boot clamped onto the tire. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a shackle, a symbol of everything they were trying to do to me. I knelt down, running my hand over the cold metal, and made a promise to myself. They could put up their signs, lock my equipment, threaten me with fines. They could call it progress or annexation or whatever fancy term they wanted. But this was my land, and I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, and looked out over the ranch. The sun was almost gone now, the sky a deep purple streaked with orange. Max sat at my feet, his eyes fixed on the barn where the officers were still lingering. The horses had calmed a little, but they were still restless, their tails flicking nervously. I took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs, and felt a spark of determination ignite inside me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I pulled out my phone again, this time to call my lawyer, Dean Halpern. He was a no-nonsense guy, a former prosecutor who'd moved to Bridgewater to slow down but never lost his edge. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was him. As the phone rang, I walked toward the house, my boots crunching against the gravel, my mind already racing with plans. I didn't know how deep this went, or how far the HOA was willing to go, but I knew one thing for sure. They'd picked the wrong man to mess with. Inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall as Dean's voicemail picked up. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a reminder that time was not on my side. I left a message, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Dean, it's Luke. I've got a problem. The HOA's on my land, saying they own it. They're charging me rent, locking my equipment. I need you out here. Call me back. I hung up and leaned back in the chair, my eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the hills, leaving the ranch in darkness. But I wasn't afraid. Not yet. I was angry, and anger has a way of sharpening your focus, of cutting through the fear. I thought about my dad, who'd stood beside me when I first bought this place, his weathered hands helping me dig the first fence post. He'd believed in this dream, believed in me. And I'd be damned if I let some clipboard-wielding bureaucrats take it away. The next few hours were a blur. I walked the property, checking on the animals, making sure they were safe. The horses were still spooked, but I spent some time with them, murmuring reassurances, stroking their necks until they settled. The chickens were back to their usual chatter, oblivious to the chaos. Max followed me everywhere, his presence a quiet comfort. By the time I got back to the house, it was late, but sleep was out of the question. I sat at the table again, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and started writing down everything that had happened. Every word the HOA guy had said, every detail of the signs, the boot, the fencing. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed to document it. This was a fight now, and I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard again. As the night wore on, I kept replaying the scene in my head. The smug smile, the clipboard, the way they'd acted like they owned not just my land, but my future. I thought about the kids who came to the ranch every weekend, kids like Elsie, who found joy in brushing the goats, who smiled for the first time in months because of this place. I thought about the crops I'd planted, the orders I'd lined up from local stores, the life I'd built brick by brick. And I thought about the audacity of these people, these strangers, who thought they could erase all of that with a few signs and a piece of paper. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the hills, I was exhausted but resolute. I didn't know what the next day would bring, but I knew I wasn't going to roll over. Not for the HOA, not for their threats, not for their money. This was my land, my home, my fight. And I was just getting started. The morning after the HOA's invasion, I woke up with a fire in my chest that hadn't been there before. The sun was just peeking over the hills, painting the pasture in soft gold, but the beauty of it felt like a cruel joke. My ranch, Second Sunrise, didn't feel like mine anymore, not with those damn orange fences and smug signs staked into my soil. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee steaming in front of me, and stared at the notepad where I'd scribbled every detail of the confrontation. The words HOA management and $8, $400 a month, glared back at me, each one a fresh stab of disbelief. Max, my dog, lay at my feet, his head resting on my boot like he knew I needed anchoring. I reached down to scratch his ears, but my mind was already racing, retracing the steps that had led me to this moment, trying to figure out how the hell I'd ended up in a war I didn't ask for. 5 years ago, I'd stood on this same patch of earth, a different man with a different life. Back then, I was just Luke Miller, a guy in his early 30s who'd spent too many years hustling in Austin, running a small landscaping business that paid the bills but left me hollow. I'd grown up in a small town not far from here, raised by parents who believed in hard work and open skies. My dad, my mom, a nurse who'd always dreamed of a quieter life. When my uncle passed away and left me a modest inheritance, I saw my chance. I sold the business, pooled every cent I had, and bought Oak Valley Ranch, a 200-acre spread just outside Bridgewater, Texas. The place had been sitting empty for nearly a decade, ever since the previous owner died without heirs. The barn was crumbling, the fences were rotted, and the fields were overgrown, but I didn't care. The moment I stepped onto the land, I felt it, a pull, a promise. Miles of golden pasture stretched out before me, framed by deep green tree lines and a gentle creek that shimmered under the sun. The hills in the distance looked like they belonged in a painting, their curves soft and timeless. There were no noisy neighbors, no city buzz, just the kind of peace that settles into your bones. I named it Second Sunrise because that's what it was, a new beginning, a chance to build something real. The realtor had warned me the place needed work, but I was young, stubborn, and ready to roll up my sleeves. I spent that first year pouring everything into the ranch. I rebuilt the barn with my own hands, hammering nails until my palms blistered, learning carpentry from YouTube videos and trial and error. I replaced miles of fencing, digging post holes in the Texas heat until my back screamed. I planted a garden, tilled the soil by hand, and watched my first vegetables, tomatoes, zucchini, carrots, push through the earth like tiny miracles. I started small with livestock, buying a handful of cows and goats, learning how to care for them through books and advice from old-timers at the feed store. My dad came out to help when he could, his quiet pride fueling me through the long days. He'd stand beside me, wiping sweat from his brow, and say, "This is yours, look. Yours." Those words carried me through the exhaustion, the doubt, the nights when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. My dream was simple but ambitious. I wanted to live off the land, to grow organic produce for the local market, to raise animals humanely and sustainably. But it wasn't just about profit. I'd always had a soft spot for kids, especially those who didn't have it easy. I'd seen my cousin struggle with her son, who had autism, and found the world overwhelming. I started researching and learned about animal therapy, how time with animals could calm, heal, and bring joy to kids with disabilities. That became my bigger vision, to turn Second Sunrise into a haven where kids could visit, pet goats, feed lambs, and feel safe. I wanted to give them moments of peace, smiles that their parents would carry in their hearts forever. The first time a shy little girl named Elsie, who used a walker because of cerebral palsy, giggled while brushing a goat named Buttercup, I knew I was on the right path. Her mom hugged me afterward, tears in her eyes, and said, "You don't know what this means to her." But I did. It meant everything. For a while, life was good hard, but good. The ranch started to take shape. The barn stood proud, its red paint gleaming under the sun. The garden produced enough to sell at the weekly farmers market, where I'd chat with customers and swap stories with other vendors. I added 3 rescue horses, their gentle eyes full of trust, despite their rough pasts. The therapy visits became a weekend staple, with kids from local schools and support groups coming out to laugh and learn. Parents would tell me how their kids talked about the ranch all week, how they'd light up at the mention of the goats or the chickens. I felt like I was building something bigger than myself, something that mattered. The nearest HOA, tucked away in a fancy subdivision called Clearwater Estates, was 5 miles down the road. I barely gave it a thought. My land was zoned for agricultural use, far outside their boundaries, or so I believed. Clearwater was a world of manicured lawns, gated entrances, and people who cared more about curb appeal than community. I'd driven past their neighborhood once or twice, seen the identical houses and the signs dictating mailbox colors and grass height. It was the kind of place that felt sterile, like a movie set instead of a home. I figured they'd stick to their corner of the world, and I'd stick to mine. Why would an HOA care about a rancher growing carrots and raising goats? It didn't make sense to worry about them, so I didn't. That was my first mistake. The trouble started creeping in last summer, subtle at first, like a snake slithering through the grass. I'd find a formal envelope in my mailbox, the kind with crisp edges and a logo embossed in gold. Clearwater Estates Homeowners Association. The first letter was oddly polite, welcoming me as a neighboring land contributor and inviting me to an informational session about their territorial growth planning. I read it, laughed, and tossed it in the trash. Neighboring land contributor? Territorial growth? It sounded like corporate jargon, not something that applied to a guy with dirt under his nails and a barn full of hay. I figured it was a mistake, maybe a mass mailing that accidentally included me. But then another letter arrived a few weeks later, and this one wasn't so friendly. The tone was sharp, the words laced with authority. It said my property would soon be reviewed for alignment and standardization with Clearwater Estates community policies. There was a phone number at the bottom, so I called it, more annoyed than worried. A woman named Diane answered, her voice syrupy sweet but practiced, like she'd given the same spiel 100 times. "Oh, Mr. Miller, no need to worry," she said when I pressed her about the letter. "This is just a courtesy update. We're expanding our community footprint, and we like to keep neighboring properties informed." She dodged my questions about what expanding meant, offering vague assurances that my ranch wasn't affected. I hung up, uneasy but not panicked. Diane's voice had been too smooth, too rehearsed. I'd dealt with enough salespeople in my landscaping days to know when someone was hiding something. Still, I wasn't one to sit on my hands. I hired a land attorney named Dean Halpern, a grizzled former prosecutor who'd settled in Bridgewater to escape the city grind. Dean was the kind of guy who wore cowboy boots to court and didn't mince words. I drove to his office, a small brick building downtown, and spread my property documents across his desk. The deed, the zoning map, the survey certificate. He leaned back in his chair, chewing on a toothpick, and scanned the papers with a practiced eye. "Look, you're solid," he said, tapping the deed. "This land is yours, free and clear. No HOA has jurisdiction out here. Their covenants don't mean squat on agricultural zoned property." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't waste your money fighting these clowns. Just ignore them unless they get real stupid." I left his office feeling lighter, like I'd dodged a bullet. Dean's confidence was contagious, and his laugh had a way of making the world feel smaller, less threatening. I drove back to the ranch, the windows down, the smell of summer grass filling the truck. For a few months, it seemed like he was right. The letters stopped. Life settled back into its rhythm. I planted a new vegetable section, peppers and eggplants, which sold like hotcakes at the market. I added a couple more goats, including a tiny one I named Peanut, who became Elsie's new favorite. The therapy visits grew, with more kids showing up each weekend, their laughter echoing across the fields. I even started planning a small orchard, dreaming of peach and plum trees along the creek. The ranch was thriving, and I was too busy to think about Clearwater Estates or their nonsense. But Dean's words, "unless they get real stupid," kept nagging at me, a quiet warning I couldn't fully shake. I started noticing small things, things that didn't add up. A black SUV parked at the edge of my property, just beyond the fence, its tinted windows impossible to see through. The first time I saw it, I figured it was someone lost, maybe a hunter scoping out the hills. But it kept showing up, always in the same spot, always for hours at a time. I'd catch the glint of sunlight off binoculars, and my stomach would tighten. One afternoon, I'd had enough. I marched across the field, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and tapped on the driver's window. It rolled down slowly, revealing a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, with a map spread across his lap like a prop. "Is this parcel 19C4? He asked, his voice casual, almost bored. "No," I said, my tone flat. "This is private property. You need to go." He nodded, folded the map, and drove off without another word. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, my gut telling me this wasn't random. Parcel 19C4. I didn't know what it meant, but I memorized it, scribbling it on a scrap of paper when I got back to the house. I called Dean and told him about the SUV, the binoculars, the weird question. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Keep an eye out, Luke. Could be nothing. Could be someone sniffing around for development. If they come back, get a license plate." I started checking the property line more often, walking the fences at dusk, looking for anything out of place. I'd find tire tracks in the dirt sometimes, fresh ones, but no sign of the SUV. Max would trot beside me, his nose low, sniffing for trouble. The ranch still felt like home, but it was starting to feel like a home under siege. I'd lie awake at night, the creak of the house settling around me, and wonder what Clearwater was planning. Were they just flexing, trying to scare me? Or was this the start of something bigger? Something I couldn't see coming? The answer came 2 weeks ago, on a morning like any other. I'd driven into town to pick up feed and check on my aunt, who'd been under the weather. It was a routine trip, for hours round trip, nothing unusual. I sang along to the radio, the windows down, the warm breeze carrying the smell of cedar and dust. When I pulled back into the driveway, though, the world tilted. The orange fencing was up, slicing across my land like a wound. The signs were everywhere, their red and white letters screaming ownership that wasn't theirs. The HOA officers stood by my barn, their neon vests glowing like a warning. The clipboard, the smug smile, the boot on my tractor, it was all real, all happening, all wrong. Looking back, I could see the pieces falling into place, the slow build of their plan. The letters, the SUV, the binoculars, they weren't random. They were steps in a strategy, a campaign to wear me down, to make me doubt myself, to prepare the ground for their takeover. Clearwater hadn't just stumbled onto my ranch. They targeted it, studied it, marked it as theirs long before I knew they were watching. The realization hit me like a kick to the chest, stealing my breath. This wasn't about bylaws or community standards. This was about power, greed, and a group of people who thought they could rewrite my life to fit their vision. I stood up from the kitchen table, my coffee cold, and walked outside. The air was crisp, the sky clear, but the ranch felt different now, tainted by their presence. Max followed me to the paddock, where the horses were grazing, their heads low. I leaned against the fence, watching them, trying to find the calm they usually brought me. But all I could see were those signs, that boot, that clipboard. I thought about Elsie, about the kids who needed this place, about the crops I'd planted and the animals I'd raised. I thought about my dad, his voice echoing in my head. "This is yours, Luke. Yours." Not if Clearwater had their way. They'd already shown they were willing to play dirty, to lie, to intimidate. And now they were here on my land, acting like they'd already won. But they hadn't. Not yet. I clenched my fists, the anger burning hotter, sharper. This was my home, my dream, my fight. And I'd be damned if I let them take it without a war. The days after the HOA's invasion were a blur of rage, determination, and sleepless nights. I woke each morning to the same gut-punch reality. My ranch, second sunrise, was under siege. The orange fencing still scarred my property, the red and white signs mocking me with their lies about HOA management. The boot on my tractor sat like a shackle, a constant reminder of Clearwater Estate's audacity. But I wasn't the type to sit still and stew. I'd built this place from nothing, and I'd be damned if I let a bunch of bureaucrats in neon vests steal it. Max, my dog, sensed the shift in me. He'd follow me around the ranch, his eyes sharp, his low growls mirroring the fire in my chest. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about my life, my purpose, and the people, kids like Elsie, who needed this place as much as I did. I called Dean Halpern, my lawyer, the morning after the confrontation. His voicemail picked up, so I left a message, my voice tight but steady. "Dean, it's Luke. The HOA's on my land, saying they own it. They're charging me rent, locking my equipment. I need you out here. Call me back." While I waited, I walked the property, checking the animals, documenting everything. The horses were still spooked, their ears flicking nervously as I approached. The goats bleated, restless in their pen, and the chickens clucked warily. I snapped photos of the fencing, the signs, the boot on the tractor, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. I didn't know what I'd do with the evidence yet, but I knew I needed it. This was a fight now, and I wasn't going to let Clearwater catch me unprepared. Dean called back an hour later, his voice gruff but focused. "Luke, I'm on my way. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to them. Don't touch their crap. Bring your deed and any property documents you've got. We're gonna sort this out." I could hear the rumble of his truck in the background, the urgency in his tone. Dean wasn't just a lawyer. He was a fighter, the kind of guy who'd gone toe-to-toe with corrupt developers and won. Knowing he was in my corner gave me a sliver of hope, but the weight of the situation still pressed down hard. How could this happen? How could a group of strangers claim my land, my home, and act like I was the one trespassing? When Dean pulled into the driveway, his dusty old Chevy kicking up gravel, I was waiting by the barn. He stepped out, his cowboy boots hitting the ground with a thud, his briefcase slung over one shoulder. He didn't bother with pleasantries, just motioned me over and popped the briefcase open on the hood of his truck. We spread out my documents, the deed, the zoning map, the survey certificate, the title, everything I'd brought to his office a year ago when those first HOA letters started arriving. He scanned them, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tight. "This is your land, Luke," he said, tapping the deed. "No question. No HOA borders come close to your parcel. They're bluffing, but they're doing it with muscle." "Bluffing," I said, my voice rising. "They've got fences up, Dean. They're charging me rent. They put a damn boot on my tractor. That's not a bluff, that's a land grab." He nodded, his expression grim. "It's a power play. Rich HOAs like Clearwater do this sometimes. They push first, act like it's a done deal, and hope you're too scared or broke to fight back. But they've got no legal standing here. Not unless they've got something forged or someone on the inside." "Forged," I said, the word catching in my throat. It hadn't occurred to me, not yet, but the idea sent a chill down my spine. Could they have faked something? A signature, a form, a map? The thought made my blood run cold, but it also sharpened my focus. If they were playing dirty, I needed to be ready for anything. Dean and I drove to the county clerk's office that afternoon, the documents in a folder on the seat between us. The clerk, a young woman named Amanda, looked nervous when we asked her to pull up any recent filings involving my parcel number. She typed quickly, her eyes darting between the screen and us. This shows a rezoning request was submitted 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice hesitant. "It includes land parcel 171B, which is your ranch." "Who submitted it?" Dean asked, leaning forward, his tone sharp. She frowned, scrolling. "It says Clearwater Community Holdings. It was signed by a Diane Mayer, acting as property liaison for expansion." My heart sank. Diane. The same Diane who'd answered my call last year, her voice all sugar and evasion, telling me not to worry about those early letters. I'd known she was trouble, but this was next level. Dean leaned in closer. "Amanda, can you print the document with the signatures?" She nodded and handed us a copy. There it was, clear as day, my supposed signature at the bottom, right next to a consent checkbox labeled landowner approval for annexation. But I'd never seen this form in my life. Never signed it, never agreed to it, never even heard of it. My name was scrawled in a looping, unfamiliar script, nothing like my blocky handwriting. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. "That's a forgery," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dean's eyes lit up with a fire I hadn't seen before. "Then they just made a very big mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He folded the paper carefully, like it was a loaded gun, and turned to me. "This is our leverage, Luke. They've crossed a line, and we're gonna make them pay for it." We didn't stop there. From the clerk's office, we headed straight to the sheriff's office to file an official complaint for property fraud. The deputy on duty, a guy named Tom who'd bought eggs from me once, took our statement and promised to pass it to the investigations unit. but he warned us it could take weeks to process, maybe longer. HOAs like Clearwater have deep pockets, he said, shaking his head. Their lawyers will drag this out. You'll need to get a court injunction to stop them from doing anything else on your land. So that's what we did. Dean called in a favor from a judge he'd worked with back in his prosecutor days, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Ramirez. We filed for an emergency injunction to halt all HOA activity on my property until ownership could be clarified. It was a long shot, Dean admitted, but the forged signature gave us a strong case. We had to wait a few days for a hearing date, but for the first time since those signs went up, I felt like I was fighting back, not just reacting. But Clearwater wasn't sitting idle. That night, as I sat in my kitchen, staring at the ceiling, a knock on the door startled me. Max growled, his hackles up, and I grabbed a flashlight before opening it. A man in a black polo shirt with a Clearwater HOA badge stood there, holding a yellow envelope. "You've been served," he said, his voice flat, and handed it to me before turning and walking away. I tore it open, my hands shaking. Inside was a formal notice declaring my barn and crop fields part of the Community Recreation Annex. I was ordered to either pay rent immediately or remove all animals and equipment from the area. My eyes scanned the paper again and again, the words blurring. They weren't just claiming my land, they were targeting the heart of my operation, the barn where I housed animals, stored feed, and held therapy sessions for kids. It wasn't just a building. It was everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, Max at my feet, the envelope crumpled in my lap. The quiet of the ranch, usually a comfort, felt oppressive now, like the walls were closing in. I thought about Elsie, about her smile when she brushed Buttercup, about her mom's voice on the phone that morning, asking if the therapy visits could continue. I thought about the crops I'd planted, the orders I'd lined up, the dreams I'd built. And I thought about Clearwater, about Diane Mayer and her fake smile, about the men in suits who thought they could erase me with a few pieces of paper and a bulldozer. The next morning, I got a call from Elsie's mom. "Luke, I saw something online about the HOA taking your ranch," she said, her voice thick with worry. "Are you okay?" Elsie's been asking if she can still come this weekend. My throat tightened, and I had to swallow hard to answer. "I don't know yet," I said, hating how helpless I sounded. "But I'll try my best." She paused, then said, "We love what you do, Luke. Don't let them take it from you." Her words lit a spark in me, a reminder that this fight wasn't just about me. It was about the kids, the community, the people who believed in this place. I hung up and walked outside to feed the animals, determined to keep going no matter what. But when I reached the barn, my heart nearly stopped. HOA workers were already there, setting up scaffolding, one of them drilling into the wall. "What are you doing?" I yelled, storming toward them. A man in a hard hat turned, his expression annoyed. "Making space for the new game room." HOA directive. "I have a court injunction pending," I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "You can't build here." He shrugged. "Haven't seen it yet." Orders came from the top. And then, right in front of me, a bulldozer rolled toward the barn, its engine roaring. Max barked wildly, running in circles. I threw myself in front of the machine, arms wide, screaming, "Stop. You're going to kill the animals." The driver hesitated, his eyes wide, but it was too late. The bulldozer's blade hit the barn doors, and the crash echoed across the ranch like a thunderclap. With splintered, beams groaned, and dust exploded into the air. I watched in horror as the doors I'd repaired myself shattered, the front of the barn tilting under the weight. "No, no, no," I screamed, sprinting forward. "The animals are inside." Dean's truck screeched into the driveway just then, and he leapt out, waving papers in the air. "Back off now," he bellowed at the crew. "This land is under legal dispute. I have the court signature right here." But the damage was done. The barn was half destroyed, its front caved in, the roof sagging dangerously. Inside, the goats were screaming, the horses panicking, and Buttercup was trapped near a pile of falling hay bales. I charged in, scooping her up, nearly tripping over broken boards as dust choked the air. Dean held the barn door open, shouting, "Luke, hurry." One by one, I rushed the animals out, Max helping guide them, Dean herding from behind. We got everyone out just seconds before another beam crashed down. The bulldozer operator, shaken, mumbled, "I didn't know they were inside." "I thought it was empty." "You nearly killed someone," Dean shouted, his face red. "You're in violation of an active injunction. I'm calling the sheriff." The HOA suits watching from their SUVs scattered like roaches, one barking into a walkie-talkie before speeding off. I held Buttercup, her tiny heart pounding against my chest, and fought the urge to break something. The barn was a wreck, tens of thousands of dollars in damage, maybe more. Sheriff Dalton arrived an hour later, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. "What in God's name happened here?" he asked, taking in the scene. Dean handed him the injunction papers. Clearwater's HOA breached this and bulldozed into my client's active livestock barn. Dalton scanned the papers, shaking his head. "This is beyond HOA. This is criminal. I'll open an investigation, but their lawyers will try to delay it. Prepare for a long fight." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Whatever it takes." The sheriff nodded. "I'll get you a case number and file for destruction of property. We'll need statements from everyone." He pointed at the bulldozer operator. "You better not leave town." Dean and I spent the rest of the day salvaging what we could. The animals were safe but spooked, so I moved them into horse trailers and reinforced part of my garage for shelter. The barn wasn't just wood and nails, it was where kids laughed, where parents found hope, where animals healed. Clearwater hadn't just torn down a structure, they'd tried to tear down my purpose. But I wasn't going to let them. The next morning, I called friends in town, farmers, ranchers, church buddies, people who'd always had my back. When I told them what happened, they didn't hesitate. Jake, an old rancher down the road, said, "Say no more. I'll bring my backhoe and a crew." Mandy, who ran a small construction company, offered leftover lumber and nails. Helen from the co-op promised to cover feed for a month. By noon, a dozen vehicles pulled into my driveway, loaded with tools, supplies, and people ready to help. We started with the animals, making sure they were comfortable, then began clearing the barn ruins. Dean documented every piece of damage for the court case, snapping photos and making notes. Even Elsie and her mom showed up. Elsie hobbled forward with her walker, her eyes wide as she took in the wreckage. "Why would they do this?" she asked quietly. I knelt beside her. "Because some people care more about power than people. But we're not going to let them win." She smiled, pulling a hand-drawn picture of Buttercup from her backpack. "This is Hannah's for the new barn." I don't cry easily, but I did then. For 3 days, the ranch became a small town of its own. Neighbors worked from sunrise to sunset, hauling wood, fixing beams, painting walls, welding iron. Kids cleaned, teens ran snacks, and elders offered advice and prayers. It wasn't just rebuilding, it was healing, a reminder that while Clearwater had lawyers and money, I had a community. But Clearwater didn't stop. On the 4th day, as we worked on the barn roof, a luxury sedan pulled up. Diane Mayer, the woman behind the forged signature, stepped out, her designer shoes sinking into the dirt. She waved to a cameraman and announced a peaceful settlement, offering a leaseback agreement that would let me use my land under HOA oversight for $9,200 a month. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "You lied. You forged my signature. You bulldozed my barn." She smiled like a predator. "That has yet to be proven in court." Dean intervened. "You're on private property. Leave, or we'll file for trespassing." She didn't budge, turning to the camera. "We regret the confusion and hope Mr. Miller reconsiders our generous offer. Progress waits for no one." She handed me the folder and left. I tore the papers to shreds, letting the wind carry them away. Then Dean's phone rang. His face paled as he listened. "The county records office just froze your title," he said. "There's a dispute logged on the deed. You can't sell, refinance, or file insurance claims until this is resolved." I felt like I'd been kicked in the gut. They were locking me out of my future. Dean nodded solemnly. This just became a full-scale land war. That same day, Clearwater posted online, announcing Clearwater North Park, branding my ranch as their newest expansion with trails and a farm-to-table partner ranch. The post had hundreds of likes, people excited about my land without knowing the truth. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. They were rewriting my life, and the world was cheering. That night, under the half-rebuilt barn roof, I made a vow. They'd picked the wrong man to steal from. I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting for every kid who'd smiled here, every parent who'd found hope, every animal I'd saved. Clearwater thought they could erase me, but I was going to make them regret ever stepping foot on my ranch. The morning after Clearwater's latest stunt, ripping up my fences and leaving my cows to wander, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The fight had consumed me, turned my days into a blur of court filings, community support, and sleepless nights. But now, standing on my porch with Max at my side, I saw the path forward. Clearwater Estates wasn't just trying to take my land. They were trying to erase me, to rewrite my story as if I'd never existed. But I wasn't invisible. I had a ranch, a community, a purpose, and a fire in my gut that burned hotter with every dirty trick they pulled. They'd underestimated me, and that was their fatal mistake. Today, I wasn't just surviving their attacks, I was going to end this war. Dean and I had spent the previous evening strategizing, poring over the whistleblower documents that had blown the lid off Clearwater's scheme. The spreadsheet, with its chilling note, fast-track parcel 171B, high value, minimize resistance, was our smoking gun. It wasn't just my ranch they'd targeted. Dozens of other landowners were listed, their signatures forged, their properties marked for annexation. We'd already rallied 7 of them into a class action lawsuit, but Dean wanted to go bigger. "We don't just defend your land," Luke he'd said, his eyes glinting with the kind of resolve that could move mountains. "We take down their whole operation. We sue the board members personally, freeze their funds, and make sure they never pull this crap again." I nodded, my jaw tight. Do it. Hit them where it hurts. But lawsuits take time, and Clearwater was relentless. While we prepared for the courthouse showdown, they kept pushing, their attacks growing bolder, more desperate. 2 nights after the fence incident, I woke to strange noises outside. Around 3 a.m. Max was growling, pacing by the door, his fur bristling. I grabbed my boots, a flashlight, and my phone, stepping into the pitch-black night. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle. Then I saw them, 2 figures in black, crouched near the rebuilt fence, their tools glinting as they tried to cut through the wire. I flicked on the flashlight and shouted, "Hey!" They bolted, disappearing into the darkness, but Max lunged after them, barking like a fury. I called him back, my heart pounding. I filed a police report the next morning, but the culprits were never caught. Sheriff Dalton suspected they were hired hands, likely sent by Clearwater to sabotage me quietly. That same day, my water line was severed and the power to the barn flickered out. Dean stood with me at the breaker panel, shaking his head. "They're trying to break you, Luke. They want you to walk away." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. "They started this. I'm finishing it." With the whistleblower's help, we tracked down more landowners from the forged documents. One by one, they confirmed they'd never signed anything, never given Clearwater permission. A veteran named Mr. Carmichael broke down in tears, his voice shaking. I thought I was losing my mind. They told me I'd signed, but I knew I hadn't. They made me feel crazy. His story, and others like it, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was theirs too. We gathered affidavits, testimonies, notarized statements, building a case that was ironclad. By the time the courthouse hearing was set, Our lawsuit wasn't just Luke Miller versus Clearwater HOA. It was a class action juggernaut, a reckoning for every landowner they'd tried to bully. The day of the hearing, the courthouse in Bridgewater was a circus. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Supporters packed the hallway, spilling out onto the steps, holding signs that read "Save Our Land" and "Farmers Aren't for Sale." Inside, the courtroom was standing room only, the air thick with anticipation. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Dean, my hands clasped tightly, my heart hammering. Across the room, Diane Mayer sat flanked by two high-priced attorneys, her white blazer pristine, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her presence, cold and calculating, like a snake waiting to strike. The other Clearwater board members were there too, their faces a mix of arrogance and unease. They thought their money and lawyers would shield them. They were about to learn otherwise. Judge Ramirez, a woman with a reputation for cutting through bullshit, took the bench. Her eyes swept the room, silencing the murmurs. She didn't waste time. "Do you have documentation proving Mr. Miller's voluntary inclusion into Clearwater HOA?" she asked, her voice sharp. Diane's lead attorney, a slick guy in a tailored suit, stood with a smug smile. "Yes, Your Honor. We have a signed consent form and email confirmation." He handed over a folder, his confidence practically oozing. Dean stood calmly, his boots scuffing the floor. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the signature is a forgery." He handed over our stack, the whistleblower's files, a forensic analysis from a handwriting expert, signed statements from 10 witnesses, and affidavits from other landowners. The courtroom was silent as Judge Ramirez flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. Minutes stretched like hours, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. Finally, she spoke, her voice like a gavel. "Clearwater HOA has failed to provide verified consent from Mr. Miller or any of the landowners listed. Furthermore, the evidence presented indicates a clear pattern of document forgery, property encroachment, and intimidation tactics." You could hear a pin drop. Effective immediately, this court rules in favor of Mr. Miller and the other plaintiffs. All claims of HOA ownership or management over these lands are null and void. Clearwater HOA is fined for damages, legal fees, and will be investigated for criminal fraud. Any construction or development activity on these properties must cease immediately. The courtroom erupted in cheers, people hugging, clapping, shouting. I exhaled, my chest loosening for the first time in weeks, but Judge Ramirez wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, her voice rising over the noise, the court recommends that the Clearwater HOA board members step down and the HOA's charter be reviewed by the State Attorney General's office. Diane's face, for the first time, cracked, her lips tightening, her eyes narrowing. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. I didn't cheer. I didn't clap. I just sat there, letting the weight of the victory sink in. We'd won. My land was mine again. But it was more than that. We'd exposed Clearwater for what they were, thieves in suits, bullies who thought they could steamroll anyone in their path. As the crowd spilled out of the courtroom, people slapped my back, shook my hand, called me a hero. But I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man who'd been pushed to the edge and refused to fall. Outside, on the courthouse steps, I stood quietly, Max at my side, and looked up at the sky. The sun was high, the air warm, the world bright again. Reporters swarmed, shoving microphones in my face, but I waved them off. I didn't need to talk. The truth was out, and it was louder than any soundbite. Dean joined me, his briefcase swinging at his side. "You did it, Luke," he said, a rare smile breaking through his grizzled exterior. "You took on Goliath and won." "We did it," I corrected, glancing at the crowd of supporters still chanting nearby. "This wasn't just me." He nodded, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Damn right. Now let's go home." That weekend, we threw a celebration at the ranch, and it was like the whole town showed up. Neighbors brought casseroles, pies, and enough beer to float a barge. A local bluegrass band set up near the rebuilt barn, their fiddles and banjos filling the air with joy. Kids ran through the fields, chasing goats and laughing, their voices a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. Elsie was there, her walker steady on the grass, a tiny medal made from a soda cap pinned to Buttercup's collar. Hero, it read, and I smiled every time I saw it. Old friends raised glasses, toasting to justice, to resilience, to the little guy who wouldn't back down. The sun set golden over the fields, painting the ranch in a glow that felt like a promise kept. The biggest moment came when Elsie climbed onto a hay bale, her mom steadying her. The crowd quieted, all eyes on her small frame. "Luke is the kind of person who doesn't run away," she said, her voice clear despite her shy smile. "He stays, he fights, and he wins." The applause was deafening, hands clapping, boots stomping, voices cheering. I raised my glass, my throat tight, and looked out over my land. Still mine. The barn stood proud, its new beams strong, its paint fresh. The animals grazed peacefully, the crops pushed through the soil, and the creek sparkled in the distance. Clearwater had tried to erase me, but I'd stood my ground, and they were the ones who'd lost everything. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Diane Mayer and 2 other board members resigned, their names tainted by the scandal. The state attorney general launched a full investigation into Clearwater's operations, uncovering a web of fraudulent deals stretching back years. The HOA's funds were frozen, their clubhouse shuttered, their reputation in ruins. The Austin Tribune ran a follow-up exposé, detailing how Clearwater had targeted rural landowners to inflate their tax base and property values, a scheme driven by greed and arrogance. Other landowners came forward, their stories echoing mine, and the class action lawsuit grew, promising more reckoning to come. But for me, the fight was over. I went back to my life, tending the animals, planting crops, welcoming kids for therapy visits. Elsie came every weekend, her laughter brighter than ever. The ranch thrived, its scars a testament to its strength. I'd walk the fields at dusk, Max trotting beside me, and feel a quiet pride. This was my home, my purpose, and no one could take it from me. The story of Second Sunrise spread far beyond Bridgewater. It became a rallying cry for landowners everywhere, a warning to HOAs and developers that the little guy could fight back and win. Social media buzzed with hashtag Save Second Sunrise, and strangers sent letters, donations, even hand-drawn pictures of Buttercup. A Texas senator proposed new land protection laws, citing my case as proof of the need for reform. I didn't ask for the spotlight, but I carried it with gratitude, knowing it amplified the truth. Clearwater thought they could rename my ranch, turn it into their sterile vision of progress. They thought they could forge signatures, bulldoze dreams, and silence me with fear. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the community that stood behind me, the kids who believed in this place, the animals who trusted me to keep them safe. They didn't know that some things home, heart, justice, are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. So here's the lesson, raw and real. When the world tries to take what's yours, when bullies in suits or vests or badges come knocking, don't bow, don't break. Stand tall, call their bluff, and fight like hell. Find your people, raise your voice, and let the truth be your weapon. Because no one gets to erase you. Not an HOA, not a corporation, not a single soul. This is my story, but it's yours too. If you're out there, facing your own Clearwater, know this. You're not alone. Fight on, stay strong, and never let them dim your sunrise. And if you want more stories of grit, justice, and the little guy taking down giants, stick around, because this is just the beginning.